We're beginning now our meeting in the framework of the Post-Grow initiative. I'm Guillaume Balas, MEP from France. I chose this thema of minimum income because I think it's the big debate for us if we believe there is a lot of transformation today in all the framework of labor, and we need to really understand what is the real definition of minimum income. I've on this board, on my right, Mr. Karakas, policy analyst, European Parliamentary Research Services, very important for us, MEPs, from this European Parliament. Stanislas Jourdan, head of Positive Money Europe, former coordinator of the European Citizens Initiative for Basic Income and co-founder of the French Movement for Basic Income.
Yeah, thanks.
That's true. Sophie Swaton, teacher at l'Institut de Géographie et Durabilité de l'Université de Lausanne, author of the book Income for Ecological Transition. Very interesting link between the two themes. Jeroen, it's like that? Jeroen. It's better. Van Ranst, youth officer for the Flemish part of Belgium. Ludovic Voet. That's true? Okay. Youth officer for the French-speaking part of Belgium. I support myself the idea of basic income because in the last French presidential election, the topic was probably in some way ahead of this time. Now, the subject is finally taken seriously. Yes, we can see President Macron in France proposing basic income or of activity. It's absolutely not my basic income, but it's very important in the battle of ideas because we gain one word, and it's a good thing. In the last presidential election, that was maybe the only new idea in the political debate, but it was very difficult to explain to the citizen what is the meaning, the real meaning of minimum income. A lot of time, a lot of our citizens, workers, all citizens, say to us, you just want to give money and nothing for the people. No duties, money and no duties, that can be a solution. And it was very difficult to explain that's a new view of the social protection, freedom for citizens, a new possibility to have a pressure for the employers and saying we don't want bullshit jobs today, and the capacity for ourselves to try to have a lot of time to find a way, create new things, new perspectives for our life. But for us, in this campaign, minimum income is not only that. That's a response for insecurity, inequality, and poverty. That's also maybe a response in front of the crisis of the welfare state, and how to find a way, a different way to have a response in front of this crisis, very different of the neoliberalism today. And that's why we're working a lot about this idea of basic income. But we have to say today it's not the moment last year to have a real political debate in a big election like presidential French election in France. So we need to think, we need to work about the definition of minimum income, about the transition to start from our social framework today to this new world with ecological transition, this new world of post-growth transition, and a new social framework with this minimum income. So I stop my bad English now, and I give the floor to Mr. Karakas to, if you could say to us today, what are the work about this idea in this Parliament in your service?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Balas, thanks a lot for the invitation. I just briefly had a chat with your assistant, Albert Klein, about the relevance of basic income on the European level. This I can say beforehand. At the Commission, you will have difficulties to find someone responsible on this topic, and my theory, my explanation for this is that they don't take this topic as serious as it maybe should be. But we'll see after the experience we have in Finland by the end of the year, if when the results come out, that the Commission will maybe take an initiative or not. Well, my today's presentation, I will touch upon three topics. After a short introduction about the definition and the main idea behind basic income, I will provide some data from experiences from countries who are currently testing basic income or did it in the past. Then, if time permits, I know after 15 minutes everybody will fall asleep, usually. But the arguments pro and contra and some alternatives to basic income. Usually basic income is considered to be an alternative to what we have today, social welfare benefits, but we also discuss alternatives even to basic income. So, basic income, this idea got popular in the recent years because, as you're all aware, I guess, globalization, the financial crisis we faced, and also the digital revolution which we have, they led in many member states to higher unemployment and inequalities. And in this context, that idea of a basic income became quite popular. And if we look at several polls across Europe, we always have a majority supporting this idea. A majority means 60% and even more. There is, in this context, also the debate about the industrial or digital revolution we face, because when we talk about basic income, we often think about the low-paid sector, the low-paid jobs, for instance, in wholesale, in retail, or also in agriculture. And there are estimations which say that 1/3 of these jobs will be lost in the next 20 years. And so we need a serious alternative to, or a social net to, for these people. And what you, Guillaume, just said with minimum income and basic income.
It's basic income, it's just my English.
Yes, because minimum income is actually the amount of money you receive without being taxed on it in your member state. So, but we are talking about basic income. And a popular definition on basic income, I have to read this. It's an income paid by a political community to all its members on an individual basis without means test or work requirements. So, and it is paid in general in cash rather than in kinds or in rebates. And the exact figure, how much a basic income could be, depends very much on the situation in each individual state. So it could be 150 euros, which sounds not very much, but there are some member states, 150 euro is quite, or 1,000 euros. So there is no definition how high or low it could be. Another assumption or idea is with basic income that, as you can imagine, it would create some costs. The idea is that basic income would cover or even replace the existing social welfare systems, which are actually in every member state of the European Union quite costly. Then there is also sometimes a bit confusion about basic income, about universal and unconditional. Unconditional means that there are really no preconditions. So you could be a billionaire, you don't have the obligation to work. And universal means there are no selection criteria along age, gender, or even the place of residence. So I would like to ask the audience at this point if you are aware of the idea, of the main idea of basic income. Where does it come from, and why should the state provide its citizens with money? Do you know it? Do you have an idea? If not, well, the idea behind paying everyone an unconditional amount of money is based on the ideas of a US-American philosopher, Thomas Paine, who lived in the 18th century. And Paine called, and now this is the point, called for a compensation for expropriation when land holding became private, and the question, property and enough money. So that's his idea, and so the original owners of the exploited common resources, by definition it's everyone, should get a basic income in return. And today's famous citation says, if you have to pay taxes for existing, you should be guaranteed a basic minimum income for surviving. So this is actually also the idea, a similar idea behind. So the empirical data I just mentioned, well, we have since the 1970s a couple of countries who tested basic income. Today, well, we had the proposition on the table in Switzerland and also in Canada, Ontario, but Switzerland rejected it in a referendum, and in Canada the pilot program didn't even start because of some political debates. But currently the testing countries, we have it in the Netherlands, in Finland, and in Spain. But the thing here is it's in these countries, in Netherlands, Spain, and Italy, it's just in one city. So it's really on the micro level, and it's difficult from these countries to draw conclusions for the macro level. But Finland, if we look at Finland, is right now conducting the world's largest basic income experiment. So it's not only in one city, it's the whole country. We have there 2,000 randomly selected citizens between 25 and 58 years old. And the thing with Finland, it's also criticized because of this, is that these 2,000 randomly selected people are already receiving unemployment benefits. So they already are part of this social welfare state. And this has raised some criticism why the experiment is only focused on unemployed people and not on students or, I don't know, on elderly people or even people who work. The amount is 560 euros per month, and what they get, and the experiment is for 2 years. It started last year and will end by the end of this year in 2018. There are no results published yet. We are all looking forward for the results. They will be, I think, in a year from today on, will be published. So what was the aim behind this experiment? So the idea was to see whether basic income can help reduce poverty and can reduce social exclusion and, in particular, bureaucracy, which bureaucracy is quite often has the main share of the costs of the social welfare state. And what we have here is, in Finland, I can say it, it's, I read it today in the newspapers, it's quite contested. Despite being conducted right now and despite having 3 months left, it's highly political from the beginning. Across political parties, there are arguments saying, well, we give the wrong incentives for people. We should finance employment and not being absent of the labor market. But I leave that part for the discussion. So very briefly, the empirical data I want to finish, and then maybe 2-3 arguments. We have from the past in Namibia, between 2008 and 2009, and also in Canada in the 1970s, positive effects from experiences there, which resulted, for instance, in more entrepreneurship, in less inequality and poverty, and more and better education. And interestingly, the workforce did not decrease. So often there is the argument saying, well, when the people, if they get a basic income, they will stop working. But this was not the case in Namibia and in Canada. But also here we have the problem that it was always on a micro level, and critics say, well, if it was such a huge success, basic income, why did they stop it in the 70s and in Namibia? If it's and this is sometimes really a quite controversial debate. My last point is on the arguments why basic income, if pro and contra arguments. The pro arguments suggest that it very broadly it provides or promotes individual freedom. It has positive education on job and education selection. There are also arguments I just mentioned: poverty reduction and social inclusion. But there's also a feminist argument saying emancipation for women, being less dependent from men and their families. And the bureaucratic argument I also touched upon was that it's quite simple. As everybody gets it, you don't have to check as the deciding authority how much do you have on your bank account, and do you even have the right to get this money or not? So we would get rid of all these bureaucracy. The arguments contra basic income is that it is too expensive to finance and even to implement, and that the existing costs we have today in most member states can never cover the spending for basic income, and as a conclusion, the government would have to raise taxes, and this, again, whenever you raise taxes, in particular, this harms the poor. And another argument is that if we would introduce basic income in a given country, this country would attract undesired migration from abroad. This could be an argument, but I don't share it because, but this is my personal opinion, because you have, in most countries, you have to live a few years there and be registered in order to really get this basic income. By the way, I forgot my personal disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the author. They do not reflect the opinion of the European Parliament and the EPRS. So please, if you send out some tweets or put it on Facebook, it's my personal opinion. Yeah. So this is my very last point, alternatives to basic income. Well, this is my personal opinion. I share the argument that we should subsidize or support employment rather than unemployment. You can agree, you can disagree, but one of the main problems we have in most member states is the low-income job sector. By the way, it's 75% are women or single moms working there. So I think the governments, the states should subsidize employers who really engage these people to increase their incomes. And another argument, I read it just today, quite interesting, is why should the state finance basic income? We should take the private sector we should charge them. We should, because the argument here is, I mentioned it in the beginning, digital revolution. We have internet, social media giants who increase or pump up their profits with personal data. Your personal data has become a source. So I guess you are aware of it, or most of you are aware of it, but it has become a source, and I don't want to name the companies, but they sell these personal data you have and increase their profits. So one idea is we should have some kind of a tax or a voluntary contribution from these social media giants as in return as a compensation for the use of the personal data. And well, we can also discuss this, but I think it's an interesting concept. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doctor. It's very clear. And the last argument is very interesting. Yanis Varoufakis said the same thing about the capacity to have money because we give our data to the companies. It's interesting. I would like to remind you this event is web streamed. On Slido, you can download the app. And the code of the conference is hashtag #NO80. You can send question via Slido. as well. Stanislas, Jourdan, your movement is taking a lot of initiative about basic income. In France, local institutions saying to experiment basic income. What is today your opinion about the possible evolution of this debate?
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor to speak in this house. So, yes, my name is Stanislas Jourdan. I'm from France, but I live here in Brussels. Just to be clear as well as a disclaimer, so I currently work for, I've been working for a long time on the basic income idea with the French movement. I organized the first European Citizen Initiative. But because I thought this was not ambitious enough to campaign for basic income, now I'm working with a different organization which is called Positive Money Europe. And our ambition is to reform the European Central Bank. So just to give you an idea of how much crazy I am and how much utopist. So what do I think about the basic income idea? Well, I think it's already close to mainstream, as we've seen. The fact that Macron just hijacked the word, it just means that it's hype enough for him to surf on the wave of basic income, even though he is making hashes out of it. So I think now is the right time to be even more ambitious and to move at the European level, to move this idea at the European level. So, and this is really what I'm going to talk to you about. My idea is really to define, okay, not just why do we need a basic income at the national level. I will briefly sketch out a few arguments, but I think the next discussion is why should we also have it at the European level? And of course, how could it work? I think that's an important question. We need to imagine how it can work, and I think the justification for European basic income and the way we can implement it is very different. So I think that's really the core, I hope, the core value of my presentation. And basically I will introduce to you the proposal that one of the main advocates for basic income, Philippe van Parijs, who is a Belgian philosopher, he formulated a proposal that is called the Euro dividend, and I will introduce this concept to you and explain a little bit. So let's get started. So it's great that Mr. Karakas already spoke, so I don't need to explain you what is basic income. I think that was clear already. Except perhaps on the idea of the amount, maybe I should just complement the fact that in our movement, in the European basic income movement, what we think is the right amount it should be high enough to live in dignity and participate in society. Now, maybe a disclosure here or a nuance here is that I personally think it's not basic income alone that will make sure everyone has enough to live. I think it's basic income plus other solidarity mechanism, other benefits, think of housing benefits. And so I think this is perhaps a more nuanced way to put it, that it should be high enough, but not basic income alone. The welfare system as a whole, basic income included, should provide enough support for everyone. So that's just to precise this amount. Next slide, please. Alice, can you please? Okay, so why basic income? So I think a lot of arguments have already been explained, but I think for me those arguments, we can group them in three families of argument. The first argument is the bureaucracy argument that has been presented. So the current welfare system is very complex, and it's so complex that in a country like my home country in France, we have a non-take-up ratio of 50%. That means 50% of the people who should receive the minimum income, the RSA, they do not make the request to get this benefit. Why? Because they don't know about it, because the formula is too complex, there are too many conditions, and so on. Or even because they don't want, because it's humiliating for them to request, to beg money to the state. So the idea is that we can modernize this system by giving the money to everyone, and therefore you cannot even fraud the system because everyone gets it. So I think that that's an argument of simplification. The second family of argument is the argument that was also presented. I think the reference to Thomas Paine is really important. You need to check out Thomas Paine because he made the argument that basic income, the justification for it is not it's not a charity. It's not because you're poor that we should somehow help you. It's because we are all citizens of the same country, of a political community, and it happens that in this political community we have common resources. We have resources that we should manage collectively, such as land, such as natural resources. Think of oil. In Alaska, that's the way they do it. They distribute the profit of the oil industry to all the citizens. So every Alaskan citizen, you have to live there a few winters, so it's not like so easy. Huh? It's a bit cold there, though I would not recommend to migrate there just to get the basic income, because it's only $1,000 per year, so it might be not worth the flight ticket. But it already exists, you know. So you consider oil, or even data for that matter. It's a great example. Data is a common resource. Oil is a common resource because, you know, it's from the ground. No one deserves it. It just belongs to everyone because it's in our land. And therefore, we should all receive a share from it. I think that's really the idea of basic income. And third, and perhaps most relevant for the discussion we have today about post-growth and transition, the idea of basic income, of course, is to emancipate people. You know, by decoupling income from labor, we give more bargaining power to people to actually choose what activity they want to do with their lives. Do they really want to continue working for banks or for other kind of bullshit jobs type of things? Or do they want to reduce their working time, allowing a better distribution of jobs, and so on? So I think that's the three families of argument. But that's for national, that's sort of the general arguments for basic income in general. Now in the next slide, I'm going to present you the argument why it should be European as well. I think the main argument right now is that we have a crisis of legitimacy of the European Union, which is connected to the crisis, to the Euroscepticism, all those things, climate change, everything that's going on, the power of the lobbies here in Brussels. All those things, all those crises together are questioning the legitimacy of Europe. In history, there are different ways nations or institutions have built their legitimacy. If you think of the German, the German as country, they have a great nation. They because of their culture, and they build this sense of we are proud of being Germans. For example, it's just one example, but many countries do that, of course. But this is perhaps the archetype. A second way to create legitimacy is the Greek way. The Athenian democracy is by giving rights, political rights to people. You can vote, but in Athenian democracy, you could even participate. People were selected by random to become a temporary MP, in a way. So I think this is by giving rights to people. The third way, which I think is really missing in Europe, is by giving people benefits, by giving people an actual tangible advantage of being part of that community. And in most countries, this is what welfare state is about. And in Germany, when they created the first pension system, it was also about uniting the country. So that's, I think what's really missing in Europe is a concrete benefit. I think a lot of people have lost the sense that the EU is doing something for them, and basic income would do, I think, just that. So it would anchor a sense of citizenship of this EU. Obviously, one of the main arguments is tackling poverty as well at the European level. Because I'm mentioning this argument now, it's because I think we have to realize that poverty is a European problem, if not a global problem. So I think it's a bit it's a bit illusion. It's a bit of an illusion to think that we are still going to tackle a global problem through the nation states at the national level. So I think that's an argument for moving this competence at the EU. And third, one of the main arguments that I'm going to make today is also it's about having a basic income at the European level would create a macroeconomic stabilizer. Maybe it's a bit of a jargon here, but basically it would create a more resilient system because we would have transfers across countries. So imagine if we had the basic income in Greece during the crisis, financed by the EU. If we had the basic income before the crisis, financed by the EU in Greece, the shock, the austerity that was required and the effect of the crisis would have been much smaller. Why? Because there would be this flow of income guaranteed by the EU and not the Greek budget. So you see, you would have a certain, you would make sure that the population in Greece have a certain purchasing power that will not reduce because of the crisis, because you have this system that is at the EU level and not the national level. Just to make an example. Next slide, please. So how to make it happen? Obviously, you might be wondering already, but how can you do a European basic income? Because we don't have the same living standards in all countries, and we have actually quite a big disparities between, say, Bulgaria and France and Germany. So how can we have the same basic income in all those different countries? So the answer lays in the Euro dividend proposal that I was mentioning, that has been formulated by Philippe Van Parijs. And this proposal really is about having a two-tier system. a system of basic income with two levels. The first floor on the blue, in the blue bar on the bottom of the chart is the Euro dividend, so the European basic income. It's a floor, and on top of that, every member state, every country has its own complementary basic income or other form of minimum income. It doesn't have to be unconditional. The key point being, the EU should provide the first floor, make sure that no one is under that threshold, and then every country can have its own welfare state as they do already today. Although I would agree that the point, of course, is to make sure everyone is lifted out of the poverty line. So I think there should be a responsibility for member states to make sure that with their own national welfare state, they make sure people, every country should be obliged to complement the European basic income with other schemes to lift people out of the poverty line. So that's how basic income at the European level can work, I think, because let's face it, we are not going to harmonize all fiscal and social system across 27 or maybe 28 if Brexit is reversed. We are not going to harmonize all those things, and if we manage to do that, it would take 1 century or more. So we have to find another way, and I think this is the way. We can start from the bottom, and maybe gradually this European basic income will grow. But we are not going to tell every member state, look, tomorrow we're going to build a super mega welfare state at the EU level. It's just not going to fly. It's not going to work. It would be a disaster even if we tried. So I think this is a way that we can implement basic income in a different way. Next slide, please. So how to finance it? How much time do we still have? I'm getting last already in time. But okay, that's fair. I think so obviously what we talk about, imagine a euro dividend of 200 euros, which is a sort of baseline proposal. I mean, we can imagine other amounts, but I think it's a good average, 200 euros, think of it. It would require 8% of European GDP. So we need to take 8% of GDP, centralize it at the EU level, and then give it back to all citizens. 8%. The current budget of the EU is 1%. So we are talking about quite an important leap in a fiscal union direction, So we have to find taxes that we would centralize at the EU level, and those taxes have to be, sizable, sustainable. Maybe I won't detail too much here, but so what are the options? Next slide. There are many options, but I've chosen to present 4. I think the first one, the easiest one, is the VAT. Tax and consumption. Why? Because VAT already serves as the tax base, so to speak, of the EU budget. So when we calculate how much Belgium is paying to the EU, we look at the VAT amount. We calculate a bit of other things as well. There are a few other factors, but basically we take that as and we say, okay, Belgium has to pay X% of their budget, of their GDP, which is based on the VAT. So basically, it wouldn't be too far to say from now on, we're going to take 10%. Imagine you have we're going to just centralize VAT at the EU level, and this will be the EU budget, and this budget will finance basic income. That's the first proposal. I think it's workable, but of course, it's not the most progressive taxation system. Another system would be the European corporation tax. I think there's a very undeniable case that we need at some point the European tax on corporations because of tax evasion issues, and also because multinationals, corporations, have been the main beneficiaries of the single market. So if multinationals have been the first beneficiaries of the single market, why are they still paying taxes to their national member states? I think they should give back to the single market. So that's an argument for such a tax. And in terms of political feasibility, we are getting there. There's a lot of work being done to harmonize the corporation tax base. So in a few years, it wouldn't take much to say, well, from now on, there will be a special regime where all multinationals who are doing more than X% of their sales in the single market should move to the special regime. The next proposal is a carbon tax. I think it's undeniable that we need a carbon tax, especially to move to a post-growth economy and a more sustainable and less environmental harmful economy. So we need a carbon tax, and it makes definitely sense to do such a carbon tax at the EU level, because if we do it at national level, there will, as we have seen again, there will be tax evasion, temptations, and so on. So it has to be European. And the last proposal, which is actually connected to what I'm doing now with positive money, is the idea of quantitative easing for the people. So very briefly, you know, the European Central Bank has injected 2.5 trillion euros in buying assets on financial markets. So we think, you know, actually instead they could have given us all 1,000 euros, and it would have stimulated the economy much more quickly. So now maybe on the downside, so I think this is a great proposal to initiate the basic income, but probably in the long run we cannot just rely on the money creation mechanism. So it could be a way to start it, but we will need taxation systems to finance it on the long run anyway. But maybe because it will take ages to create a fiscal union, maybe that's the way to start it. Just an idea, up to discussion. So, yes, thanks. Last slide maybe, and then I'll. The question, of course, is, you know, we are pulling 8% of GDP at the EU level, so that means some countries are going to pay more than others. You know, if you live, the French government will pay a certain amount of taxes to the EU, and then the money will go back to French citizens as well. So this graph tries to show how much, as a state, how much do I give, how much do I get back for my country, for my population, right? So what we see, so we've done this chart with a friend to try to see, you know, what would be the redistribution impact between countries. So basically, how much Greece wins, how much Germany loses, to put it bluntly. We've done two scenarios. One scenario is where you give 200 euros per citizen, you know, Greek citizen 200, Luxembourgish citizen 200, and so on. The other scenario, which is in red or orange, it's where we adjust this amount by purchasing power parity. So that means it would be more like 230 euros in France and more like 120 in Bulgaria. So we do those two things. And what we see is, obviously, if you give it flat, it's a huge redistribution mechanism. I'm not sure you can read on the chart, but the country on the top right, so the main beneficiary would be Bulgaria, and they would have a boost of their GDP by 30%. You know, that's just too much, actually. So if we do by purchasing power, then it's probably more realistic, because we have 9% for Bulgaria, and it would cost 1.6% to Germany. The country that would contribute the most would be Luxembourg, unsurprisingly. And other Western rich countries would basically contribute to around 1% of the GDP. So we would have quite an important transfer for Eastern Europe to a realm. I mean, we can discuss that, but I think personally it's quite relatively modest as a cost. You know, 1% to make sure that no one lives under 200 euros in all EU. I think it's worth discussing about it. Basically, we should have a negotiation on that. And of course, it's not just that Eastern countries are going to benefit from it. I think Germany would be also one of the main beneficiaries, because in Germany now you have a lot of working poor. You have a lot of people doing, you know, the mini jobs, the €1 per hour salaries, and this kind of thing. So actually, I think 200 euros for Germans in some situation it would be quite good when you have nothing given by the German welfare state. So worth thinking about it. Next slide, very quickly. So I think this sets the direction. I think there are more modest steps to get there. We could start with children. We could start maybe with young people. We could also start with a sabbatical year type of thing, where everyone can decide at some point in their life to receive, let's say, 1,000 euros per month during 1 or 2 years by the EU, which allows them to start a company, do training. And so we could think of other more targeted schemes that would go along that path. And that I think would be maybe, that's what we need to discuss basically now until the next election, right? So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Very interesting. I believe in ancient old Athens, the name of the citizen income was the mistos. Mistos, I believe, when you went to the public meeting, you have money, the mistos. And it's an interesting idea. to say if you participate to the political framework, you could have an income. So, Sophie Swaton, we need ecological taxes for basic income or for ecological transition. Often we make a link between the transformation of labor and the basic income. How we could make a link with the ecological transition?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a very huge honor to be here today with all of you. So thank you very much. So yes, that's a great question. That's the point, I think. The question. So please, next slide, please. I have quite a few slides, but it will be not so long. The tools today, the tools of my communication is to explain, of course, the definition, but before you spoke about Thomas Paine. I think it's very important. So first of all, I'd like to make you understand what is the theoretical context of the proposal. So that will be my first point. Second point, you will maybe, I hope so, understand better what is this proposition of an ecological transition income. And maybe, if I have time enough, or maybe as a conclusion, we'll see, I can keep or save some time to explore some more concrete experimentation. Next slide, please. So first argument, the context of the research is, and maybe I anticipate a little for the further discussion, but I think one argument is missing when we speak about basic income. First of all, is that the natural resources are limited. And the problem is actually not only about climate change, but also of the 9 planet boundaries. 4 of them have already, we passed away already, 4 of them. So the situation, as reminded by Mr. Guterres a few days ago, is that we have really few time to act. It's now or never, maybe 2 years, maybe 5, but all specialists are agreed to say that it's urgent. We really need to act. So for me, this argument, the context of the natural resources, their limitation is fundamental. It should be the first argument. For me, it's the first argument. Second slide, please. So, for example, just as an illustration, the 9 limit boundaries, planet boundaries. Second argument, it's about the technological revolutions and societal transition. The growth is different today from different previous one on previous growth, and we have now about data, big data, talk about this, about algorithm performance, and we have to face a big problem of unemployment. So the question is, robots will replace or not workers? So with robotization, artificial intelligence, and so on, we have really this problem, and I totally agree with you. Employment is also the heart of the question. So how to conciliate climate change and the digitalization of economy? That's a great question. Third point, and third element of the research is about inequalities. It's not easy to speak about inequalities because there is a lot of different kinds of inequalities. So, of course, social inequalities are growing up, most of them, and we can say, I think, that in the last Oxfam study, 8% have more than half of the planet in terms of resources. So it's a bit problematic. And also, you already speak about new kind of poverty, in Europe, so full poverty, and also environmental inequality. It's not only about north, but it's only about south. And countries who participate the less to extraction, resource extraction, have the most consequences of what is generated. So it's a big problem, and we also have to face with it. It's not only about Europe, it's also about the global viewpoint. So my research question is, one question, how to help people, workers, more specifically, to fill with new jobs, new kind of employment, but taking into account these planet boundaries. And I argue first, and I support two main hypotheses. First of them, I think that we really need to keep together social and ecological goals. We have to keep them together. And second hypothesis, I still, for my part, believe in employment. In the traditional left, some of it was not the case of Benoît Hamon, of course, and I support this proposition in this way. But I still think that employment is a factor for social integration. People want work, and work can be a good thing. It can always be better than a laser. For a few months, when you have a passion, when you like your work, it can be a good thing. So I don't think that employment will disappear. I think that a lot of employment, and what will be also dangerous, I think, it's using the term of Jean-Noël Giraud, l'homme inutile, the useless man. Today, also supporters of basic income are Tesla and promoters of a technological revolution, because they don't believe in work anymore. They think people who have the less skills, and even also in Africa, they would not be able to find employment anymore. So, we should maybe take the problem of employment first, and not to baisser les bras, and really to take it with us and think about it. So I come now to my proposal. I hope the context is clear to help you to understand maybe better what I understand with this ecological transition income. So next slide, please. Just before to define it, I will say that I first observed three main limits identified when we speak about this new job about green transition, job in ecological transition. First of all, when I spoke with, for example, agricultors or people wanted to get in the ecological transition, first limit they need is the need, of course, for an income security. They agree to transit, but they need to be safe, to be secure. So first limit is to start a project. They need an insurance somewhere, and income can promote it. Secondly, they don't know how to start. It's nice to say, hey, go get in transition, but how can we manage? So they need also to be coached. They need people to help them to start this project. So this is a second limit. And the third one is that the most of the time people feel alone. They agree to start something, but they want to feel belonging to a community. And somehow, basic income is still, I know well the work because my thesis was on basic income. I've been working for many years, nearly 20 years on these topics. The philosophy is real libertarianism, but it's individual. What about collective? It's not all about money. It's also about sharing, about collectivity. It's about social viewpoint. So this is the three limits. So now, please, next slide. My proposal is that we condition an income to an ecological or social activity, but in a very large term. Lots of activity already existing. It's, I precise, very different from the proposition of President Macron. It's not this at all, because there is a huge list of this kind of activity. And we should be, there is activity, employment, job, but terms are different. So we condition, but in an ecological aim. Secondly, it's not only about e-com, but we propose to give also a real coaching for people. And thirdly, we propose to make them adhere to what I call a democratic structure, in a large sense also, like cooperative, association. But the point is that you can belong to a rural community, not to feel alone, with a lot of shareholders and people. You spoke about private economy, but also with people that can be involved through a common viewpoint. So, what kind of fundings? Of course, we can finance this kind of proposal by taxes. I will not develop this point because you already give a lot of examples. I totally agree with them. But not from oil. Alaska is a very bad example to finance ecological transition income. Of course, there is a paradox. If you want to change the paradigm, if you want to move to a sustainable society, it's impossible. You have to stop massively fossil extraction. We should live now with only 20%. 80% should stay in the earth. So for me, I really don't agree with this solution. But more innovative, I would find that fiscal stimulus will be very interesting, support for green industries, but also local currency. And in a territory, that could be very interesting. So now I think that, of course, the kind of foundings you defend reflect a philosophy. Marc de Basquiat, for example, in the MFRB, it's a flat tax. You can't put in the same level a flat tax and Alaska income and money currency. So I think that you have to support behind what is a philosophy and in what sense you want to support the ecological transition. So do I have a few minutes again? So maybe in the third point about experimental track, because I think we need to experiment. So what is interesting in France is that there is a special law for experimentation. Before putting it at the national level, it's also possible to experiment in some place, and it's perfect because it's really the topics of the ecological income. So it could be, I saw and I had contact with a long-term unemployed zero territory in France. I don't know if you already heard about this, the territoire zéro chômeur longue durée. It's an interesting way, because they already have this, what I mean, accompagnement or coaching project. They already have methodology. So my point is not to invent something ex nihilo, but already to see and to use what already exists. So the methodology still exists, social methodology still exists. We could also maybe link with the MFRB, the French movement of basic income. And in Grand-Sainte, I had contact last week with Grand-Sainte, north of the country. Experimentation of basic income could be, why not, maybe a research action, so maybe an ecological income. And we also started an experimentation in Nouvelle-Aquitaine with the project Terra. So it's micro, of course, but it could be more macro at a further level after, with what Frédéric Bosquet nomes revenu d'autonomie, autonomy income, and it's through the ODG goal. So very interesting too, because it links basic income with ecological targets and social aims, and in a territory linking people with social impact. So that's more collective and quite interesting. In Switzerland too, we could experiment, even though the initiative was rejected, but there is still a big movement in Lausanne for basic income. So in Lausanne, experimentation could be led. That's also a possibility. And also micro-local experimentation already started through private foundation. Also, I've created to be my own foundation to try to find findings and to experiment. So it already started, but it's too new, and we have to wait a little bit to have more significant results. And also, we have a research action started about acceptability. What could be the acceptability of a basic income? About the different amounts, but about amount and coaching, for example. So that's very interesting because it can help also politics to support kind of project. I think it would be not a randomization, of course, but in experimental way with qualitative interview, etc. And finally, maybe in anywhere else in Europe, of course, I think that the perfect framework will be the transition network and town in transition, like, for example, in France, Ville en Transition, with Damien Carrel, the major of the ville. That will be a very interesting framework because it could help to identify what are the commons in a territory. And each territory is also different. It's not like a global response. It's impossible. Each territory, each community is specific, has her own resources, natural resources. So we need to identify what are the common on a territory in water, in forest, and also what are the people, the association, the organization already working, involving in the territory. That's very important. So, and two next slide. Yes, thank you. I think that employment really is a point and can be created in different areas. Energy, waste, recycling, transport, agriculture. It's not just about invocation. It already exists. All this employment already exists. But they need support. They need visibility. They need somewhere, it's not like assistance. We don't touch with ecological income. We don't touch the social protection in each country. Maybe later, but for the moment, we don't touch. So it's just more to help and to give more visibility to this employment which still exists. So, next slide, please. It's totally in connection with ILO prognostic. We heard about 60 million jobs who are to be created. But my point is that we don't see them. We need to help them to get more visibility. So also linked to social assistance, service to communities, jobs are to create it. And to conclude, of course, there is a link between ecological transition and beyond on basic income. But the philosophy is very different. Thomas Paine explains that Earth belongs to everybody. We have to take resources from Earth because we are supposed to have the right to do this. In the view, the proposal I defend, I think Earth belongs to herself. I'm not sure we have to take into account the fact that the Earth belongs to us. We belong to the Earth. And if we don't do something very quickly, Earth can put us out very quickly. So this is very important to have in mind. So of course there is link, but the philosophy is different. And I think we have to start about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ludovic Voet, Jeroen van Ranst. And the workers, if minimum and basic income is a libertarian view, is it a weapon against the rights of workers today, against the social protection, the traditional social protection? What is today the opinion of trade unions? Because in the last presidential election in France, we could have a lot of discussion with the trade unions, and it's true, it was very difficult, because a lot of them saying, we fear if there is basic income, it is the possibility to have a total destruction of all the gains of workers in the past and for the future. What is your opinion today?
Thank you, Guillaume, for giving us the floor. We are, as you said, trade unionists, and we represent the young side of the Confederation of Christian Trade Union in Belgium, one of the two biggest trade unions. We will, in this presentation, try to propose a proposal that we have for young people. In this sense, we are not here expert of social security and nor expert of universal basic income. It was really interesting to hear also from campaigners what they are thinking about, and I think it's really stimulating. But of course, as you said, in trade union, the topic is not an easy question. It's a hot question. And so, as young representative, we want here to build bridges and to discuss, even if there are really for us points which are really difficult to discuss. So why we wanted to have a proposal. So as youngster union in our country, our main concern is, of course, the situation of many young people. And as a youngster union, we also fear for future generation. And as unionists, of course, we want to defend work quality and social protection. That's the two cornerstones of our action. And a social protection if there's a lack of employment for people. So in this sense, we try to identify. So the debate is alive in our trade union about basic income. We try to identify. We didn't took a position nor against nor in favor. But we conclude that there were, for the moment, the discussion was not, we were not able to have a position on that, but that we had to identify social needs that are not protected already by social protection. And these social needs, we numbered three of them. It's all the situation of young people, which is a main concern for us. It's also a single parent family with responsibility. In Belgium, there's a big lack of social protection for these people. And it's also the situation of workers in transition from their occupation situation. So when we look in social security in Belgium, that's three points where we see that there's a lack and there's poverty risk, and that we want to have a serious proposal to face these problems. So we worked on the young people problem. In recent years, we have seen a deterioration of the living condition of young people. We can notice that students study more longer. We can also notice that it's more and more difficult to get a stable job, and the precariousness of job is increasing. Nevertheless, our social security hasn't evolved since then. So the social security in Belgium was created when there was nearly full employment, and a situation where young people find a job directly after graduating. So this situation makes that nowadays in social protection in Belgium, young people until they get a full contract, permanent contract, I think Belgium has one of the you need to work 12 months in the 21 last months in Belgium to get an employment benefit. And so that's one of the most difficult, I think, in Europe. even if there's an unemployment benefit partial when you are coming out of school. So this is the context in which we are, and so we made a survey just recently, and we are working on the conclusions and on the results. But there are a lot of numbers that are problematic for us. 97% of the young people want job security. That's one of the biggest number in this survey. We also see that the huge majority, 80% of young people from 18 to 30 years, would still work even if they didn't need it financially. So the value of work is still predominant in society, and even in the youth generation. So that's one of the points that we have to take to begin the discussion also, that work will not disappear. Even if we say work will disappear, young people does not want work to disappear. Other numbers, 47% of young people are concerned about their future, especially their professional future. 20% have postponed their plan to leave their parents' home and move into housing, and their project to move into housing because of their professional situation. When I'm telling about 20% of young people, it's 20% of young workers. It's not including unemployed and students. And another one, 72% of the French-speaking young workers in Belgium still have not obtained a permanent contract after 1 year of work. So these are facts that make difficult the insertion of young people in a good living situation. Because we know that with a permanent contract, you can buy a house, you can leave the home of your parents, etc. So that's and also we see that there's an explosion of student jobs. For example, students are working 28% of students are working more than 16 hours a week. So this raises also the debate about if you're working during your studies, is your work to study or to work to finance your study? So we see in Belgium also that the risk of poverty is high. We see it also, you see it in the presentation, on the European level. There's 26 million young people at risk of poverty. And the number of young people at risk of poverty has increased by 4% from 2009 to 2014. Next slide. Next one, it's what I just said. Yeah. So why do we want a permanent contract? That's one of the union typical revendication. In Belgium, as everywhere else in Europe and in the world, a stable and permanent contract is important to have a stable salary at the end of the month. As price grows on the house market and the loan for an apartment also grows, it becomes more and more essential to be able to provide a permanent contract to young people. Most people start their career as contractual, or if they have the chance to, these temporary work are followed by fixed-term contract. And in Belgium, you will only receive, as I say, unemployment benefit after 12 months of work. There is a little social protection for people who did finish. We will not go into detail, but who just finished nearly 40% of each generation graduating can go into social protection because either they are they are more than 25 and they are not accepted anymore in this social protection assurance, or they have no diploma from secondary school and they are not accepted neither. So we got a social protection for young people that is quasi-inexistent, and that's one of the big problems. So what are the source of income for the young people? We identify three main sources. The two most important sources are family support. It's especially true for students. The second one is student labor, which is more and more important, as I said. And then we have to think about government support to young people. There, we have 4 or 5 disparate policies. Like you can have scholarships, but it only applies to 20% of students, for example. There's also social aid, but which has increased in the last 10 years. But you have to. There are conditions for that, and you have to prove. That you will do. That you are quasi. That you don't live anymore with your parents, and also that you will not do long studies. So there are really conditions which are harsh on this level. There's this insertion allocation I just told before, and there's also child support, so childcare. But childcare, of course, it's just it's already. It could be good if it would be also the case in all Europe, but in Belgium, it's 100 to 150 euros per month. It's not really supporting young people. It's more supporting parentality. So when we look at young people from 18 to 25, for example, which is one of the generation we identify, which is really problematic in terms of social protection, there's no social protection for them. So that's where we see that we have to have a proposal for them, which do not make them depend on parental support, which is really one of the most inequality. Because if you can be supported by your parent to study, okay, you go to study. If you're not, you're not choosing to go to study. Student labor is also unequal because if you study, there are studies that say that if you work too much as student labor, you will have problem to achieve your studies. And also the government support, as I said, are not sufficient. So what are the consequences is that students and unemployed young people stay at home. So one in 4, what are the consequences? 1 in 4 youngsters between 18 and 34 are still living with their parents, so there's no stable income and no possibility for them to go into life with a good living condition. And then they have also to accept shitty jobs, as you said, because of this lack of social protection. So we think that a big social protection could change things for young people. So I will give the floor to Jeroen, who will make our concrete proposal of allocation of young autonomy allowance. But for us, then, one of the key debates is to raise that we want to raise with the proposal is: do everyone agree that young people should be protected autonomously in social protection? I think that's one of the debate that this debate doesn't exist. When we talk about maybe a little bit with the proposition of Benoît Hamon last year, but politically it's students, for example, and young people going into the beginning of their career. The fact that they are not protected by social protection is a problem for nobody. and there's no concrete proposal about that. So students and young people are always seen as they can vote when they are 18, but they are low, as we can say, lawlessness citizen in social security. And we think that in the 21st century, making young people resource depend on family situation is outdated also, because family has evolved. The concept of family has also evolved. So that's why we have a concrete proposal that it's not a basic income, but it is in the debate something that we want also to lead in the debate, the links that we can have between our proposal and the difference also.
Okay, for the second part, my name is Jeroen van Ranst. For those who have already seen the flyer, you know we are speaking about a youth autonomy allowance. From all the things that Ludovic just explained, we can see that a lot of external factors are determining the choices you make in life. So why are we advocating a youth autonomy allowance? Because we believe that a choice to whether or not you would prolong your studies, for example, should not depend on your family situation, as explained by Ludovic. We believe that young people should be able to make voluntary choices, whether or not to prolong those, whether to stand on their own feet, also after graduating. Now, the purpose, we believe, in this autonomy allowance is to empower young people into making autonomous choices. Not only the choice to study and which particular courses to follow, but also not to accept work that you're overqualified for, or to accept work that is precarious, as we see a lot of youngsters today is their only option. So also whether or not, the choice whether or not to participate in student labor should not be made based on the need to do so, to actually be able to study. So, and I take the example of the parents came to me as very striking. The fact that a lot of young people stay home until they're 34, if we're looking at 1 out of 4 people in Belgium. So also here, we believe that living with your parents should be an option but not an obligation. And now there's a large group of young people who have this as the only option. So we're going more than mere child benefits redistributed towards the young person himself. We believe that an autonomy allocation should be given to young workers as well. Their choice whether or not to prolong their studies should not be dependent or influenced by the possible missing of financial gains if you choose the other scenario in which you would keep on studying, which is an argument that is uttered quite often. So, next slide. Yeah, okay, we're already there. No. So, what is it for us as trade unionists? We're talking about a new pillar in our social security. It is an allocation implemented in that security, in that sense that it provides the support for people who need it. And we believe that young people need it. They would receive this income from the year they become 18 years old until the year they become 25. It would be implemented independent from your family situation. And about the amount, all I have to say about that at this point is it should be enough at least to create more possibilities, to make choices that are independent from family situation and other external factors. Right now, we notice that the emphasis for young people is on having to. If you want to find a stable job, then you have to go to college, you have to, afterwards you have to go to university, get a good degree, otherwise you won't find a decent job. And then when you get that degree, the next step is to find work immediately, because you're immediately without an income. And then when you find that job, and for a big part of youngsters in Belgium, but of course also in Europe, This means that you will start with precarious job, contractual work, for example. There should be, there is that you have to accept that, and that you have to keep that job for as long as possible, otherwise you will be again without an income. So, with this, in this framework, we ask ourselves the question, is this the mentality we want our youth to have these days? Like, I'm going to do this because I have to. When you turn 18, you should ask yourself the question, where do I want to be in 7 years? And this is where the autonomy, where our autonomy allowance comes into the picture. Which steps can I take to get there? Be it education, work experience, travel, or something else. So it actually moves the emphasis from obligations to possibilities for our young people. So a question often uttered is it unconditional? Well, for us, this is a yes and a no. Already we mentioned the age condition. So at this point, we're not advocating a universal allocation for everyone. We will give our young people 7 years to build a better and stronger foundation by offering them possibilities and a financial security to do so. So this has to launch young people, into their careers in a much faster and stronger way, we believe. We believe as a society we should make this investment into our young people. And we can rest assured that in the future the social benefits expenses for the same group will drop. But apart from the age condition, there is the right of the right accompaniment, already mentioned with Sophie's explanation. Also in our proposition is very important. Why? Because this amount of responsibility should go hand in hand with adequate coaching. So this should be provided by public employment services and, of course, by our schools. And lastly, there is a condition of registration. Not in the way that it happens today, that you registrate in a educational institution or public employment service, and then that you would suffer from repercussions if you don't meet to certain standards. No, but there is the registration obligation if you want to receive this income, because we want to know where people are. In Belgium, we suffer with a huge problem of unemployed, not in training. You all know about that group I'm talking about, the needs. They are not being coached. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. And in recent years, it evolved towards 100,000 young people in the Flemish part of Belgium alone. So that's a huge problem, and employment services are really tackling this issue. They don't find the necessary tools to reach this group. So this is understandable, because if you don't have a diploma, you won't have the right to unemployment services before you're 21. So there's not a big incentive for this group also to join or to register themselves. So next, and we're almost there, I want to give you briefly the consequences we believe our proposition will have for a few groups in our society. So for students, of course, the choice of the study which you endeavor will be less determined by the parents and by your socio-economic situation. There will be extra financial report with this allowance, extra financial support to provide for your books, for your housing, for your basic needs. And there will be, as Ludovic already explained, less student labor. So students can focus on studying or choose to participate in, for example, internships that are actually relevant to their level, to their work field. It doesn't strive towards replacing the means-tested social aid system we already have today, because we believe that some students will still need it. And the same group will also still need or want to make use of the social housing projects, for example, that already exists, or scholarships. So, but again, we believe that this group will be much smaller if we can offer to every one of them a youth autonomy allowance. For graduates without income, this will give them the possibility to live on themselves. Why is this so important? Because today, if you, there is no other option. So, with this proposition, at least a bigger group of people, if they finish their studies, will be able to leave their parents and go live on themselves. So, maybe if they don't have an income at this point, they will still need, as today, public welfare support. But the group, again, will be smaller. Also, in Belgium, if you ask for public support, public welfare support, if you're still living with your parents, there's a big chance you will not get it. There's a whole different situation if you're living apart. Also, very importantly, like for a lot of young people, when you turn 18, you don't know what you want to do in life yet. So a lot of them start working a few years, and then they change their minds, and then they decide, yeah, well, let's get that degree anyway. So for these people who already worked a few years, they will have built the rights for unemployment benefits. So if they want to apply for bottleneck jobs and follow the necessary courses, this will mean that in this period of time they will receive this unemployment benefit plus the allocation autonomy allowance, which will make it very attractive to follow this perspective and to take this road. So, of course, this will be very interesting for young people and will have a big influence on their future career chances. Last, we believe that for young workers, this will also be beneficial. We know that young people have a lower pay than the average income. On the other hand, you need more money when you start in life. So this will give them an extra source of income. Also, like Ludovic explained, a lot of young people start working or start their careers in temporal or contractual jobs. So it's not possible to borrow money or to rent a house. So this will rest assured, this will be an assurance for the banks, for the landlords, that at least there will be this amount of money that is unconditional, that they will always be able to provide. Last, contractual work is typically more demanding. We see in, for example, the transport sector, we see people skipping breaks, proving themselves because they believe if I can prove myself, I will get that fixed contract that they all desire. Now, there is a lot of abuse here, and what we also notice is that young people are having a hard time to speak up to this abuse, because they know that they will probably lose their temporary job. So we believe that this will give them more support to stand up to this abuse, and employers will have to, in the end, rethink the working conditions if they want to attract us young people. So, some predictions for the labor markets. We believe there will be less need for student labor. The financial pressure on parents will be lower. The poverty that is currently on the rise in young people will decline. Less young people will be forced to work under their grade, and there will be at least some more bargaining power in hands of young people. We don't believe that it will be only in their hands, of course. Employers will still have a lot to put into the basket, but at least we will have to give. We will be able to give some more to young people. So, some last notes about all of this in a EU framework, and also where the question in the beginning came from, within an international union movement framework. As said before, the discussions are very heated, also within our ranks. So, yes, we believe that our youth autonomy allowance, that it could become a part of an adequate minimum income scheme. That's what we want to promote in Belgium. In the context, of course, of our national security system. And here we see no contradiction to the European minimum income network that exists today. Now, is youth autonomy allowance a basic income? Well, it takes a lot of elements from it, of course. But the European trade union movement doesn't support or promote the very idea of a basic income scheme. So that doesn't mean that what we present to you is an exclusive, that we are drifting away from our fellow trade union organizations with this proposal. No, the idea is more to try and build bridges, because we know that our proposal is also supported by campaigners of the universal basic income. So, in the end, we think, last slide please. In the end, some key arguments in the debate. In the end, it's a debate about values. It's the value of autonomy, of democracy, about fair distribution of resources, and I think we have to make this debate within a framework of the challenges we face today, digitalization and ecology issues we face today. So what is important is to involve trade unions in this debate and accept their role as collective actors that we have today. We believe that it is a key, that is very important for social regulation and economic democracy. So we thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. It's now your moment for observation or question, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for this panel. I would like to bring on board 3 points. Following a bit the proposals of paid sabbatical made by Stanislas, I think we can also think about shared working hours based on voluntary ways. I mean, to learn a bit with what's happened in France with 35 hours per hour, where it was very beneficial for a lot of people. It was, I think, a very interesting thing, but also just after to question why Sarkozy was elected with the slogan work more to earn more. So maybe there was some problem in the implementation or in the communication behind. So a type of sharing the working hours based on volunteer dynamics, and also to create ways to connect people to self-organize themselves and share the money, share the work, share the time. Like I remember when I was employed in Paris as an engineer for a corporation, and I wanted to work less. Answer was quite clear that even I resign or I still work 50, 60 hours per week. So we can find like platforms with people with same skills, same diploma could meet and share the hours and voluntarily reappropriate some free time and so on. My second point is about maximum income. I think when you speak about unconditional basic income, it should immediately and always be associated with the idea of maximum income, where also here we can go progressively. We can start with a rate from 1 to 100 and go down in, say, like in 10 years, we will go to 1 to 4 or something like that. And the third point, it's an idea which I co-developed within the French degrowth networks. We wrote a book about it. It's the idea of unconditional autonomy allowance. I'm sorry that the same word, that's what you use, but it's something different. So it's a bit like an unconditional basic income, and it could maybe create some convergence between Sophie's comments and Stanislas' proposals and some debates, because it's something which could be partially demonetized, where some parts could be given in accesses to public services and some goods like energy or water and so on. And it's connected to the idea of the commons and the idea of how to re-question in a deliberative or democratic way, what do we produce, how, for what kind of use. So I really, Sophie, I will send to you an email about that if you couldn't read about it yet. And there is also a very interesting research publication made by the Institute Momentum Institute, comparing unconditional autonomy allowance and unconditional basic income from a post-growth or degrowth point of view.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Ursus now after? Okay, no problem. A woman? No? Please?
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I have a question for Stanislas Jourdan. I wanted to ask you, there is, for me, a contradiction in your presentation about the fact that you made as a criteria the fact that the basic income have to be high enough, and in the same time, in your proposal at the end, you start with 200. So how 200 euro can be high enough? And second point, I wanted to ask you why you want to mix from European financing and national financing. Do you think that it's not too complex to mix the both and to make that every nation is going to be okay to finance the second part? And last point that is linked to the two others. Why you, like in the French degrowth basic income theory, there is decided that the high enough is 60, like it's the poverty line, the 60% of the median wage. So why you don't use this line? Thank you.
A question maybe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, citizens. My name is Angelos Harlaftis. I represent here the ECOEFS movement, the Pan-European and Mediterranean movement, which is based in direct democracy, in science and in ecology. It is written in a theory to our movement for the basic income, not in the way of money in the future societies, but in a way of basic goods that the citizen should have. But of course, this is far away, because our vision is very wonderful, but we have to build it. And you, the young generation, you are asking without constructing. And being an engineer, I know very well what is construction. And I invite you to come and construct with us. Because nobody mentioned the 16 trillion debt of the European economies, not of Greece. Greece is an experiment. Because Belgium has the same debt as Greece, but nobody speaks about that. We have a 16 trillion euros debt to the global societies. The Americans, they have 23 trillion. Nobody speaks about this. Nobody speaks about the pension system, which is out of order. Because you are speaking for yourselves without working, and there are a lot of youngsters all around Europe very poor. Nobody has spoken that we first have to resolve the poverty issues and the issues of the homeless. There are 25,000 citizens on the streets of Belgium 2 years ago, and right now, because I was with them in the streets for 2 years and a half, there are 16,000, when the state declared that it is going to resolve the problem after 2025. Which one of you, the young people, is on the streets to assist the homeless and the poverty issues? So I think we should discuss these things first, and of course the basic income in an experimental mode should be also discussed. Also, the digitization.
Have you a question?
I'm finishing, like everybody. I have.
Yes, but
I think it's very important, my point, because we have some experiences. So the digitization will bring, of course, the rich societies, the luxury societies, but we have to work for this, because, of course, we have to diminish the working hours when we have the robots. But how we can construct the society? We have a vision about this, and we have a solution. But we need you, the youngsters, to work very much more than the older people, because this is an ancient tradition of the human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe a response about the observation, please? Yes?
Okay. So thanks for your questions. So what is high enough? In our movement, we think basic income should be high enough, but as I was trying to explain, I think a more realistic approach is to think of high enough as basic income plus welfare state, other mechanism, should make sure that we have a high enough basic or minimum income, let's say. I don't see it as a contradiction that at the European level we will not have a basic income that is high enough for everyone. 200 euros is definitely not enough for my country in France, but at the same time it's high enough for many people in Bulgaria or in Romania or in Greece. So we have to see that. So, but the problem is we will never get a one-size-fits-all basic income at this point of time. Maybe one day the Eurozone or the EU will be a fully integrated economy and we will have the same standards of living. But for the time being, I prefer that we start from bottom and gradually increase the basic income until we have the same amount. So in fact, it's been quite understood in the basic income movement that basic income should be ideally high enough, but in the meantime, to get there, we need what we call partial basic income. That's another way to say we need compromises with society, because it's fine to believe in basic income, but we have to deal with society as it is today, and we have to deal with the problems that my colleagues on my left were talking about. And basic income, we might, I believe basic income, we should have it since one century. So, I deeply believe we should have it, but we have to look at history and think about why do we not have it already? And that's because we haven't had the political process to get there. So I believe in the process to get there. I think we need to as much as I believe basic income is the solution, I also believe we should do the youth allowance in the meantime, because that's the reality we have today. So I don't believe Europe, sorry, I'm drifting away, but I don't believe the EU could immediately do a basic income that will be high enough for all Europeans. So we have to start from the bottom, and maybe later we will have a same amount for everyone that will be high enough for all countries. Second question on so the question, if I can reformulate a bit, is will countries accept to basically give 8% of their GDP to Europe? And my response is, well, it depends on how much the Eurosceptics win the next election. But I hope that we will progressively gain a more common understanding that Europe is about sharing sovereignty. And sovereignty is not this unique thing that, you can talk about personal sovereignty, you can talk about national sovereignty, and then there's a European sovereignty, and then there's a global sovereignty. I believe in different levels of sovereignty. And if we agree that Europe is a good level of sovereignty, that Europe needs, then it's crystal clear that we need a budget for Europe. And, we cannot deal with all the problems Europe citizens want the EU to deal with 1% of GDP for a budget. So we need to increase that budget. Otherwise, we are just fooling ourselves, saying that the EU will solve problems that we just don't have the means to deal with. So it will be a battle. It will be a battle to increase that budget and to share the resource. But this is all what the EU is about. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. We are not going to converge European economies if we don't share resource. That's a big hypocrisy to say that we are going to make Romania catch up with France or Germany by giving them 0.5% of budget, It's just hypocrisy. So we need to share the resources. That's what solidarity is about.
Thank you. Please.
Just a little bit of a clarification on the first presentation, I think, mentioned was a Canadian pilot study that had not started yet. Actually, I'm unaware of any Canadian pilot study, but I am aware of an Ontario provincial pilot study that began 1 year ago. It was scheduled for a 3-year pilot. A new election occurred in, I guess it was May or June. And one of the first steps that the new premier took was to cancel that pilot. So after 30% of the pilot study, $50 million invested, $100 million still directed towards the project, it's come to a conclusion. We've already seen some really positive results come out of that 1-year pilot study in terms of the life changes that occurred to the individuals who are participating in it. And we have a lot of stories already for that. And there's a lot of pressure to continue that moving forward, both either at the provincial level and or have the federal level take that up as a new pilot study.
Thank you very much for your work and for your passion. I have 2 questions to play the smallest bit of a devil's advocate. The first goes back to the Roman Empire, when the distribution of olive oil and honey alcohol was seen as a way to appease the citizens and to convince them to not participate democratically in what was an autocracy, more or less. So my question comes in, with the basic income, it seems that the workforce participation isn't affected, but should we be worried or concerned about the democratic participation? My second question involves more so Mr. Jourdan, is if we put the responsibility of the basic income distribution on the European Union, should we be worried that this could become quite a strong bartering chip? So for the nations or the states that wish to remove themselves from the European Union, are they then in a catch-22 that they would be disenfranchising and very much hurting their population should they pull themselves out from the Union? Thank you.
Thank you. Giacomo D'Alisa, Center of Social Study, University of Coimbra, founding member of Research and Growth Barcelona. From this panel, I get this feeling of very diverse kind of approach to the basic income. We have like a Stanislas that is in some way, I will call it a neoliberal centralism, and then we can pass to Sophie Swaton that I will call environmental Leninism, and then we pass also through youth depressive unionism. But what seems to be so diverse, in somehow there is something that you all share, and it's worrying for me. That is this charity rhetoric about basic income. Why we should, in some way, support these policies is that there is an abstract benevolence of, we need to help the people, we need to help the poor, or sometimes these poor are young. I think we should go out of this rhetoric if you want at least a different approach to basic income, minimum income. And I will propose a materialist approach. Okay, so I'm more keen on your environmental Leninism, let's say, a little bit from epistemological point of view. But the point is that I don't know if you are aware that nowadays in industrial society, for each hour of productive work, we have 1 hour of unpaid work. So it means the work that we do to reproduction, for chore, for taking care of ourselves, for our well-being of ourselves, our family, our community. There is a lot of work that we already do for maintaining our well-being. This great amount can be the base on which we struggle for an income, and basic income, that I would prefer call it a reproductive income, that will make clear that this is about a struggle in the capitalist society. We are struggling for something that has a material base. And this is linked to, the feminist struggle in the 70s, like Silvia Federici was asking for the wages from the kitchen. Indeed, much of this work, of this material work that guarantee the well-being of ourselves every day, also in industrial society, came from women. And this is a way to also visibilize another struggle that we need to do, that is about the inequity of distribution of activity between genders. Thank you very much. What will be for you having this materialist approach is my question. And also I really don't understand what is your post-growth vision or proposition. If you can expand a little bit, because we are in the context of post-growth. I mean, now I'm referring specifically to depressive unionism. What is your proposal, how it is related to post-growth society? Thank you.
Thank you. One third question, please.
Hello, I'm Laura Jovignon from France, and I'm a student from the Complutense University. First, I have an observation to make to Dr. Karakas. You could also have mentioned the Indian experiments that has been really enlightening, successful, especially in terms of sanitation, child health, women's emancipation, in terms of decision making, girls' enrollment in school. And you could also have mentioned the Kenyan pilots that will start really soon, and that actually is not on a national level, but on a local level, but that will involve more than 16,000 people. And that is actually quite unique because it's the only experiment that will capture the community level effects. I also have an observation to make to Mr. Jourdan regarding your basic income distribution model. So according to what I saw, this two-floor basic income model just allow people to reach the poverty line, but actually force people to engage in work to have a decent income to live and not just to survive it, which actually goes against the unconditional core characteristic of the basic income. So I think that simply reaching the current Europe poverty line is simply not enough. And you said it yourself, the basic income must be high enough to enjoy, in the word of Daniel Raventos, the material conditions of freedom. And for example, if you would have included a gender perspective in your model, you maybe would have noticed that a woman engaged in childcare and domestic work would not earn enough with your model to make ends meet and to enjoy her right as citizen to have the material condition of freedom. So I just wonder, according to you, how simply reaching the poverty line allows citizens to alleviate poverty and to reach a real emancipation of people. And just another point, it's to all the panelists. You talk about also pragmatic steps to basic income, but you didn't mention the possibility of financing the basic income through local currency and blockchain, what Mrs. Swaton did. So actually, I would just wanted to have the opinion of all the panelists about this possibility of financing the basic income. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, maybe.
Yes, so I just want to say that it's not about charity. I agree with you, with your approach, but the ecological income is not an assistance income. It's not about charity. It's maybe to take into account skills of people, skills of young people, and I am responsible of a master of sustainability in Lausanne. And what for me, and I totally, yes, I agree with you, there is something, a real contradiction, and we have a real problem in our society, is that to develop their own projects, to develop their, I don't know, agroecological project or even more, or a restaurant, or most of them have to work for McDonald's, for example, you know. So there is a contradiction between the project of life, what the young want to do, and the way we try to help them, and the way they have to work to be able to finance their own project. So I think that what we need to do is to develop their own entrepreneurship. It's not about charity. It's not about assistance, but to find skills to make them connection. And the philosophy behind this is about Amartya Sen, about capabilities of the people. That would be my point. And it's also in a care approach, to take care, a gender approach, but to take care and to develop this belonging, the feeling of belonging to a whole community. And first of this community is the earth.
Yes. Yes. First of all, thanks for the two comments on Canada and on the African countries. You're right, both of you. I wanted to touch upon the question about, if I did not misunderstand you, democratic legitimization and basic income, right? Well, or would it have an impact on democratic participation, right? Personally, I don't think it will have an impact on democratic participation. I see a similarity between the salaire minimum, the minimum salary, yes? Wage, exactly. Yes, the minimum wage and basic income. If we have this debate in a couple of member states, I'm from Germany, so in Germany we had this discussion, should we introduce a mandatory minimum wage or not of 8 euros and a couple of cents. And the idea was, well, what political impact would that have? And I can tell you it had actually no political impact because the amount was, to my interpretation, not high enough. Others would say it's already too much, 8 euros and 50, but that's another debate. And I see the same thing with the basic income. I don't think that it will trigger or have a huge impact on political participation. I don't see that necessarily. It could have a negative impact if it's too high. If it's too high, I think one of the reasons also in Switzerland, we had this referendum, I think you are more specialized on that, was that I think we talked about 2,500 euros a month, yes, something like this. And critics say, well, it's way too high. So I think if it's the amount, it's like the minimum salary, if it's too high, it could trigger a negative effect, a populist effect, and saying, no, we don't want to finance people who are not participating in the employment sector, in the labor market. So I see more this than if it's low, then I don't think it will have an impact. And maybe another one was the how to finance basic income. Whose question was this again? Yes, how to finance basic income. Well, we've heard a couple of ideas, for instance, quantitative easing for people like the ECB gives each of you, I don't know, 1,000 euros instead of saving or holding alive the banks. Well, you should not forget in this context that money only has a value if you spend it. If I give you 1,000 euros and you put it on a bank account, nobody will have, except maybe you, because you will say, well, I can spend it whenever I want, now I feel more secure. But in macroeconomic terms, money has only a value if you spend it. So if you don't consume it, if you don't buy anything, if you don't buy a car, you can, I don't know, help Volkswagen to get rid of the Dieselgate scandal. But regarding the financing, I would prefer or suggest more to put in the private sector instead the public house or the banks for the employers who, what I mentioned, the digitalizations, employers who, instead of creating, actually decreasing employment, I would take them more into responsibility, and also the automatization companies who, I don't know, artificial intelligence, whatever. We can also think about the financial institutions. We had some ideas, still have, about, we have the tax avoidance and also the Tobin tax. We could do a lot of good with these ideas, but politically speaking, I don't see a majority for that. That's
Okay, so there are quite a few questions towards me. First, if I gave the impression that I justified basically for the charity, I think that must be a misunderstanding. So I will not do my talk again to justify why, but it's purely misunderstanding. Again, this question of the amounts, high enough. The problem is high enough is very difficult to measure. Even the poverty line is, in some ways, is meaningless as well, because it's depending on how you calculate, it's a relative thing. So actually, from a statistical point of view, because you measure poverty line by the median income, statistically you will never get everyone out of it, by definition. So just to make you think about that, I'm not saying poverty line, you know, I'm just laying the fact. Just like Alaska, by the way, we're just saying this exists. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I mean, it's bad. It's bad, but it was created in the 70s, huh? 40 years ago, 20 years, 50 years ago, it was created this Alaskan thing. So I think at the time, you know, the mentality was different. But coming back to enough. So how much is enough for you? For me? It really depends. Where do you live? Which city? What's the price of rent? How much do you need to travel? What is your standard of living? Do you buy shoes every weekend and so on? So I think it's difficult to define the perfect level of enough, first thing. And then I also believe a second thing, which is more political. I believe we can be fooled by the high enough narrative. Because what? Some people are going to come and say, we're going to give you 1,000 euros. Sounds good. It's better than the Jourdan 200 euros, right? Yes, but in exchange for what? We're going to have liberals, speaking about neoliberals, we're going to have neoliberals coming out and say, let's give everyone 1,000 euros, and as a compensation, we'll scrap healthcare, and we'll remove the housing allowance, and we'll scrap the disability benefit, and so on. But on the face of it, it will look good. People will buy it. People will vote for that. Because what I've realized from my personal journey is that 5 years ago or 10 years ago, before I didn't know about basic income, I knew nothing about social protection. I knew nothing. And I learned everything about, I don't want to be complacent or, arrogant, but I have learned a lot by studying basic income, and I have understand also, I understand now better why we have such a complex social welfare system, because there are lots of different situations. And if you have kids as well, it's different. So I understand why there's complexity in the social protection system. And I think it's a bit foolish to say basic income should be high enough and therefore we'll be fine. I actually still believe even with a high basic income, you will need complementary social benefits for this and that situations. For housing in particular, housing is a very different problem that basic income will not solve alone. So I think enough is not, and that's in contradiction to the movement I represent now. But I believe enough is not sufficient as a criteria. You know, it's not good enough to say this is a good or bad basic income. I think we have to look into the details about how do you finance it, what benefits you remove or reform. It's a very complex debate. And also you have to understand my approach. I come here to give a talk about European basic income. I do not come here to talk about how to solve poverty in France or in, So the purpose of this talk is to give you a sense of what we could achieve at the European level. And maybe it's not a lot for you, but I think for some countries it would be a lot if Europe could do that for them. So it's all relative. Obviously, I would do, if I were to present you a basic income proposal for France, I would do it around, much more than that, and I would do it differently and with different taxation proposal. But my issue is that I'm not just an utopist who want to think about great ideas for 20 years. I'm 30 years old. I don't want to wait 20 years before I can get my basic income, because by the time I will look for my pension, right? And I suppose we have a lot of that like this. I want it as soon as possible. And to do that, and in my job I do lobbying here in the Parliament, so on and so on. So I know you have to do compromises, and you have to understand the opponent, and you have to walk around and find a compromise. So that's why, yes, maybe I'm a neoliberal or something, a centrist, and maybe I'm a social traitor, as we say. But I prefer do that and get a basic income in the next 5 years, as opposed to dreaming for 20 years and then, we're still in the same shit. So sorry, that's just my approach. I mean, I think, as you say, there's a variety of approach to defend this idea or similar ideas. Whoever wins first, great. Great. I'm happy to be wrong, and we can get something better than what I'm proposing today. But that's the situation I am today. I believe we can sell this, and good luck if others want to promote something else. And let's celebrate at the end when we win. That's the most important thing, right? Thank you.
Yeah, about the charity thing, I also disagree. Why? Because social security in Belgium has a context, has an history, and social security is not a charity in Belgium. Social security is a workers' construction that workers took from employers, and we finance by our wage social security in Belgium nowadays. So by proposing a youth autonomy allowance inside social security, we are telling to young people, social security is your property. Social security is our common good. It's not a charity from the government. It's not given by the employers. It's really, I think, a strong narrative also of our common goods as workers. So I would disagree on this about charity. About post-growth, I understand the critic that our proposal is not talking about post-growth. I would say that I'm not waiting from social protection to have an influence on the economy. It could have, it can have an incentive, but as trade unionists, we have a lot of other struggles to change the economy. So the debate about post-growth is also a debate about income redistribution, about and about another society, also incentive to social and environmental change. So I'm not by this proposition. I have no ambition of system change. I have an ambition of protecting people not included in social protection nowadays, and by not being included in social protection, that it has also an influence on the economy nowadays. Because when young people have to go to shitty jobs because they don't have social protection, it also worsens the condition of negotiation, the bargaining power of the collective bargaining power of trade unions. So that's what I would say. And I will maybe ask a question also to Stan, because about the question of high enough, I think it's a trade union concern also. It's that if the next commission say, oh, okay, we are going to do a basic income of €200 everywhere in Europe. Okay, what are you not afraid that social protection will be damaged in country with high social protection? I think that if we have in this context here, neoliberal context, with right-wing parties in Belgium, if there is a basic income of €200 all over Europe, it's positive for a lot of countries. No problem to say that. But for us, there will be the discussion of how do you finance that, and if we have to finance that, okay, they will cut in our social security. So, of course, we are for better living condition in all over Europe, and we think that Europe is the solution. But what is the balance between this question? And about the high enough, why maybe we want to begin with those that we identify that are not in social security and that we want to protect directly. It's also because to finance it, it's easier to finance it for a smaller group, and also it's easier to finance it for a smaller group.
Maybe two questions, and after at the end, please.
Thank you. I would like to propose an approach to the panelists, because I think it's, especially when we talk in a degrowth context, talking about how high it is and how low and how monetized it is a trap. So I would like to suggest the capability approach, to all those who are working with basic income concept. The capability approach is to first define what kind of freedoms we want to give to the people, what kind of universal freedom we are trying to achieve. And as Ranst already said, in the concept of allowance, or at least their concept of allowance, if you manage to say what kind of freedoms we are providing by this, then you can start thinking whether it's monetary terms that can fulfill those freedoms or something else. I arrived on Sunday and it was free to travel on the underground. That's a freedom to mobility. To provide that, that's part of basic allowance. If we want to provide the freedom of mobility, if we want to provide the freedom to political participation, which some of you were talking about, like democratic participation, in some ways, basic income can contribute to that. If you work 60 hours a week, you will not be likely to take part in political participation. So whenever you think of your approaches, try and go back to Amartya Sen's capability approach and try to define what kind of freedoms we want to provide with that tool.
One very short question, please, because at the end now, please.
Hi, I'm Harry Carter. I guess I'm in between things at the moment, but also a concerned citizen. I just wanted to note on what are we going to say? So we probably want to talk about, I was just want to note, sorry, I can't read your names from here, it's too far for me, but about for the guy from the EU basic income. I think you maybe hit the nail on the head a little bit when you were talking about like the scales of implementation. It's how high do you set the bar, so to speak, and maybe the EU is too big a scale to be implementing the basic income on because of that. Because it has to be specific to specific areas. And I just wanted to, maybe we don't have time for this now, but linking it to post-growth, we're here for post-growth, and we can see some of these ideas, the basic income necessarily doesn't have to come with a post-growth future economy. So how does it fit into that? And I guess with the ecological basic income, we touched on that, but for the others, that would be interesting to explore. And also the protection of the basic income against, and we've sort of touched on it, against neoliberal or other political intentions, because you can redistribute income with the basic income, but you can also give it to people at the top, to the bottom, take away social welfare at the same time. So how do you protect for that? Because it's a big political risk to implement the basic income when we have all these welfare reforms already. So that's just a point to discuss, I guess. Cheers.
That's a lot, or after the meeting?
No, but maybe I will. I like the capability word first. Thank you. A good remark. And I think we have to think about all those different things. I mean, there's no, and I completely agree with your first statement that it's a bit absurd that we're talking about liberty, freedom, and then we are battling around should it be 850 euros or 900. And I think basic income is much more than the monetary amount. The value of basic income is much more about the emancipatory value of basic income is much more important than the monetary value, assuming it's universal and unconditional, of course. But coming back to your question, because I think that's a great question, that's really the difficulty, the challenge of this short dividend proposal, is that it will mean also answering to one of the first questions in the back. So it will mean that we have this two-level system. So we need to make sure they are compatible and they don't undermine each other. So that's why I was putting in my chart that there has to be this poverty line still, and member states must have a duty to make sure that they complement the 200 euros basic income. And there should be, penalties if France does not complement the euro dividend. There should be penalties against those countries. And it already exists, but we already have those values in our charters, but we don't just make them binding. So that would be my response. Like the EU must, at the same time it implements 200 euro basic income, it should force member states to make sure, and to provide a plan in advance and say this is, maybe that's what the Commission should do. They should say in 2 years we plan to do that. In 6 months we want each member state to send us a response about how will they reform their national welfare states by implementing, by integrating the fact that there will be a basic income in Europe. But I would also say, like, at the same time, it's the same question with the amount. At the end of the day, this is about bargaining power. If social movements don't have bargaining power, we'll get screwed. And we're already getting screwed anyway. I mean, it's, in a sense, we're already losing because we don't have bargaining power. So obviously the struggle for basic income relies on the assumption that, we'll create a social movement for it and we'll have enough bargaining power so that we get, we'll get it implemented the way, in a most progressive way as possible. But if we don't have the bargaining power in the first place, well, we lose. That's for sure. I mean, let's not dream. We have to fight. So that's my response.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to the panelists. Is basic income charity or social justice? A basic income for youth at first, or for everybody? Do we need basic income for digital transition, ecological transition, or we need transition steps to build basic income? Just my opinion about two things. It's impossible for me to have a real basic income as a new pillar of social system if we don't fight against neoliberalism system. For me, it's sure there is no compatibility between my view of basic income and the values of neoliberalism. And the good question for me is not whether or not basic income will become a reality, but which one will be implemented. Thank you.